Good evening all. Welcome to tonight's annual licensing committee meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Natalia Perez, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. If I lose connection and can't reconnect, Councillor Fiona Smith will take over for me. I'd like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. Please wait until I call on you before speaking. I also ask that members keep their questions and comments brief and to the point, please. And now move on to agenda item number 1. Apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies for absence?
Chair, yes, Councillor Francis Stainton.
Thank you very much. Can I check as well? Do we have representatives from the police as responsible authorities?
No, sorry, Chair. They send their apologies as well. They're not able to attend this evening.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Agenda item number 2, roll call and declarations of interests. I will now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. Councillor Colin Ahern. Councillor Ahern?
Yep, present.
Thank you. Councillor Victoria Brocklebank Fowler.
Present.
Councillor Wesley Harcourt.
Oh, didn't you hear me? Present.
Thank you. Councillor Rachel Layton.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor David Morton.
Present.
Councillor Sarar Kayum.
Present.
Councillor Asif Siddiq.
Present. No interest.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fiona Smith.
Present.
Councillor Matt Thorley.
Present, Chair.
And Councillor Matt Uberoy.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June 2019. Are there any comments on the minutes? I'm mindful that the meeting took place a while ago. For those committee members that attended, have you got any comments on the minutes? Are they agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
I think agreed.
Perfect. Great. I see some nodding as well. Thank you very much. Okay. Agenda item number 4, Annual Licensing Committee Report, April 2019 to March 2020. This report provides a summary update of the work and performance of the licensing team for the period the 1st of April 2019 and the 31st of March 2020. I would like to remind members of the committee that appendices 3 and 4 of this report will be considered at the end of the meeting as they are exempt items. I believe Mr. Overton and Ms. White will present this report. Is that correct?
That's right. Thank you, Chair. And Christina Perez, who's one of the enforcement officers as well, will be presenting. Yeah.
Apologies, Ms. Perez. Thank you very much. And may I say as well, before you start your presentations, we want this meeting to be quite interactive. So if members of the committee want to ask a question during the presentation, please raise your hand and I will stop the presentation and you can ask the question or questions. Thank you very much. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if we're able to share the slides initially. You can put the presentation on the screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
There we go. Yeah, it should just be coming up shortly. Here we go. Right, Deb, I think that's coming up now. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Christina. Thank you, Chair. So good evening, councillors. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for taking time out this evening to attend the annual licensing committee. I appreciate it's the end of a working day for everyone, so we will try to make this as interesting for everyone as licensing allows, I suppose. So firstly, I thought it might help to carry out some introductions, as there will be a few people from licensing, from the licensing service speaking this evening. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Adrian Overton. I'm the licensing policy and enforcement manager, and I jointly manage the licensing service with Lisa White. Lisa, I don't know if you're able to introduce yourself.
Good evening, councillors. So yeah, my name's Lisa White. I've met many of you before, and I'm the administration and enforcement manager. Thank you.
And good evening, councillors. Christina Perez, licensing enforcement officer.
And I think Maria's on the call as well. Maria Dimitrou, sorry, I can't quite see her on my screen actually. But...
I don't think Maria was able to make it, so.
Brilliant. Okay, all right, apologies. Okay, so thank you everyone. So as I said, this evening we wanted to change the format slightly for an annual licensing committee. We are conscious that we have circulated a report for the year 1920, which is obviously quite historic now. So whilst we will be reviewing this report this evening, we also wanted to cover a number of other agenda items as well, which I suppose are time critical and which we would really appreciate your thoughts and your opinions on. So this includes our response to COVID, to the COVID pandemic last year, which is actually the reason that we've been delayed having this meeting this evening. And as you can imagine, this has completely turned the licensing service upside down and has changed the way that we operate dramatically and almost beyond recognition. So I think it would help you to see how the service was structured in 1920 and then see how we adapted it last year, what things we changed, what things we didn't change, and just generally, as I said, how we adapted it. So during this COVID section of the meeting this evening, Christina Perez will also be explaining our enforcement strategy during the pandemic, and she will be outlining some of the enforcement actions which were taken and some enforcement options that we have in future as well. We also need to discuss with you this evening our approach to the Council's 2 cumulative impact areas, as the evidence for these policies, as many of you will be aware, is expiring shortly. So to help form this discussion, we have sent round a link to a video from Philip Colvin QC. Hopefully some of you will have had an opportunity to have a look at this, but it's not a problem if not. I'm happy to summarise some of the key points from that if we need to later in the evening. And I think maybe leading on from this, it might be a good opportunity, I think, to discuss the licensing policy and the approach of the licensing policy more generally as well. And as part of this policy section, Lisa will also be giving an update on the current state of play with our gambling policy. Also on the agenda, as you will have seen, there is a discussion around our pool of conditions and the availability of enforcement information in licensing reports. And I'm happy to spend rather as much or as little time on these items as is necessary. So I mean, as you can appreciate, there's quite a lot to get through this evening. But as mentioned previously, and as Councillor Perez mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we are keen to have your interaction throughout. So please do stop us if you'd like to ask a question or make a particular point. We certainly don't want this to be a case of death by PowerPoint on a Monday evening. So first of all, if I could pass over to Lisa, who will run through the 1920 report initially, and then we'll move on to the COVID report and the other sections. So over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So good evening, everyone. So yeah, so this report, the part I'm covering is from April 2019 to March 2020. So the data contained in the report in the appendices is now historic. So I'm just going to summarise a few key areas and provide you with some headline figures. But as I said, please do raise your hands and ask any questions as we go along. So firstly, if we can move on to the team and the current structure. So on page 12 of the report, you can see the current team structure. Christina, can you move the slide on? please.
Oh,
Thank you.
apologies.
Thank you. So there's the current structure. There has been some changes to the team. So Karen, who's our Senior Enforcement Officer, is currently on maternity leave. And we have a new Licensing Compliance Officer on secondment for 1 year, Adebayo. He's joined us basically due to how busy we are in the team with leading on the COVID-19 enforcement. So he will be with us, I think it's until June this year. We now also have a volunteer, Inez, who's been working with us, and she's been assisting the administration team, both licensing projects and providing general support to the team. We still do have share an apprentice, Ledan. We share Ledan with trading standards. Her time is split between the two teams. Ledan has been assisting us on the administration and on the enforcement side, especially in relation to our chasing of our annual fees and our debts. In relation to internal career progression, so within the last 2 years, there has been notable career progression within the team. I'm really pleased to say both William and Maria, who joined us as volunteers, are now permanent members of staff in the administration team. Christina, who's in this meeting tonight, has taken on a more senior role within the enforcement team. And just to say, Christina has been working at the forefront of our COVID response throughout the entire pandemic, through all the lockdowns, ensuring our licensed premises are compliant. So thank you, Christina. In relation to the management of the team, so as you're aware, Adrian and I progressed jointly to manage the team within the last 2 years. How it's kind of structured now, after we kind of did an internal review, is that I predominantly manage the administration and the finance management, and Adrian leads on enforcement and policy. Clearly our work crosses over. However, with both of our experience, we can assist either team as and when required, and this creates flexibility in the team and also resilience within the team. We think it's working really well. And although we are one team split between administration and enforcement, we think we're delivering far more effectively on what has always been a very pressurised service. So our team is generally quite new, and there has been a lot of career progression, and I do feel that now this structure's in place, we have like a very enthusiastic team as well. And despite being probably one of the smallest licensing teams in Greater London, we do think that we are exceptionally efficient with our outputs. And, you know, this is down to the whole team. Adrian and I are quite passionate managers in continuing to wanting to invest in our officers, creating development where needed or where required or where wanted. And this obviously helps increase in knowledge, but also builds resilience in the team as a whole. Do any members have any questions on the team structure before I move on? Okay, thank you. Okay, so just some key figures. So in relation to our licensing Act 2000.
Councillor Brockbank Fowler just raised her hand.
Yes, I did, Chairman. Lisa, I'm delighted to hear the enthusiasm in your voice for the new structure. Could you clarify, do we still have kind of north and south teams, or has it all kind of amalgamated into a borough approach?
It has amalgamated into a borough approach. Yes, as you know, it used to be north and south. At one point we had north, south and central as well when there was 3 of us. But
yes, that was quite some time ago.
It was some time. But yeah, now it is just an all borough approach, and we find that works really well. And Adrian is still very much involved in the high level enforcement. And we have Christina and Adebayo, who's obviously assisting. But yeah, it's a very much one borough.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so in relation to our licensing at premises, in this period we had 846 licensed premises and in excess of 3,500 personal licenses. We dealt with 1,582 applications, which was an increase on 22% in the previous year. 25 licensing subcommittees were organised, and we had 4 review applications submitted. All were called for by the Metropolitan Police. So moving on to our gambling at premises. So in this period, we had a significant decrease in gambling. So 38% betting shops, we had 42 in the borough, went down to 26. Adult gaming centres and bingo licences remained at 3 each. And then we have our ongoing permits for gaming machines and our small society lotteries at 105. The 2 sex establishments in the borough remain the same, and our scrap metal site licences remain the same at 5. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to finance management. So this year, for the first year, we've included details in the annual report of the services, income and debt for the licensing team. The reason being is that finance management is actually a significant part of our work, both in the administration team and in the enforcement team. And we just felt that it was just being missed from previous reports and previous committees. As you'll see here, you know, we are a high income generating team. Our total income in this period was in excess of 366,000. The majority of our income was from annual fees, which is in excess of 250,000. We also have income for our application fees, from costs awarded following enforcement action or appeals, and also our pre-application advice. The team generates the invoices, the administration team generates the invoices every month, so we have to manage that, and then also we enforce any non-payment of annual fees, working with our premises, and if they then still don't pay, then we suspend the licenses, and we enforce that ourselves as well. So we do everything ourselves. Within that period, we issued 279 suspension notices. So that kind of gives you an overview of the finance side.
Lisa,
yes.
Can I ask a quick question, please?
Of course.
So I know, thank you, in relation to suspension licenses, suspended licenses, I note from the report that 36 licenses have been suspended.
Yes.
So what happens in the meantime with the other ones?
So what happens is the process is we work with the premises, and then if there's still non-payment, we issue a suspension notice, which will say if you fail to pay. This is pre-COVID, by the way, Chair. So this was in this period. If you fail to pay, we will suspend your license on a certain date, and then on that date we would officially suspend their license. So that's why there was 279 suspension notices issued, but only out of that, when we run the report, when this data was provided, only 36 licenses were officially suspended. The rest had paid. Or sometimes what we find is, you know, a business has closed down and they've moved on, and it's, you know, turned into a hairdresser's or something, and they just haven't surrendered their license. So that gets captured in some of those stats as well, and then they contact us and surrender. So yeah. Does that answer your question, Chair?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. So we did undertake a number of finance projects in this period. We recoded previously. We just had all our finances going into one pot, and we couldn't tell, you know, what was from application, what was for annual fee, what's from enforcement. So we recoded, so that allowed better reporting from our point and to be able to provide that data. We undertook a project, a substantial project, calculating how much it costs the service to process an application from start to end. This allows us to then propose what we believe should be the cost of that application, obviously taking into account any committee fees as well. We also undertook a project in relation to recovery of our enforcement costs. So when we have appeals or have taken legal actions, how we can recover our costs from those actions quicker and more efficiently. Because this is the first year that we've put the finance data in the report, can I just ask, is this something you would like going forward, members and Chair? Is this something which you would like included in future reports?
Yes.
I think I find it very useful, and it's very informative. and it just gives a holistic picture of the department. So I personally welcome it. I don't know if other colleagues want to comment on the question.
I appreciate having this data.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, obviously we're nearly at the time where we'll be drafting the next report for the end of this financial year, so we'll make sure it's included in that one. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, so our service improvement work. So during this period, we were slightly under-resourced in the team, so we didn't undertake as much service improvement work as we would have liked. However, we did continue with our online forms. I must say this is a really time-consuming project, and literally it would take one of our licensing officer out of the team for quite some periods of time. So this is currently put on hold until our officer returns from maternity leave. So I can see this project ongoing over the next year or so. Our procedures, we revised all our procedures. However, then obviously in March 2020, COVID hit, and we've had to revise them again. And we're still working on them and updating them now. This is to adapt to going over to, pretty much 100% electronic service. So that's ongoing at the moment as well. Data integrity. So yeah, we have over 20,000 records on our database, so we have to, maintain our data. We run over 20 reports a week just to check to make sure there's no errors for finance management point of view, for our customer benefit. Not everything, but a lot of the information we put in our database is displayed on the website. So it's vital for the service to make sure that this information is correct and up to date. So that's just a really quick whistle-stop tour of the 1920 report, which goes into a lot more detail. So I hope that's enough information, or if you have any more questions, then please do let me know.
Are there any questions from members? I actually do have a question, Lisa, in relation to the application. So how are the applications processed? I understand that, and I know from the report that my account's no longer working. So what system has replaced that?
The online applications is Firm Step. So we have one officer who was designing the forms. So rather than it being designed externally by a third party, which it has been previously, we're having to do it ourselves, which is what's taken the time. But yeah, it's via Firm Step.
Okay, thank you. And so I see that Councillor Sadiq has got his hand raised. Councillor Sadiq?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The online application system is amazing, looks pretty good. And my question is regarding to the page number 17, pre-application advice fees, which looks like a very minor area, I can say. How they can improve online pre-application advice system where they can generate more revenue? Is there any way they can concentrate more and they can have a more revenue, and especially online, probably? Is there any considerations?
Absolutely, Councillor. That is something, and you're seeing we've actually covered that in our COVID update as an option to increase our income stream. I think for smaller businesses, we probably wouldn't increase too much. We want to be able to assist businesses, but definitely for large scale events in the borough or larger premises, we are going to be looking at our pre-application advice fee structure and revising that. But we kind of want to wait until we've come through the worst of COVID before we do that. We'll also, prior to COVID coming in, happening in March last year, we were also just about to bring in a form check-in service as well, which we will look at again. So yes, that is definitely something we are considering, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there further questions? Okay, are we now then going to be moving on to Appendix 5, licensing service COVID-19?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Lisa. Yes, so apologies. Yeah, so thank you. As mentioned, in March 2020, on the slides there, all officers in the licensing service, I suppose along with the majority of council officers, were asked to work from home with immediate effect. So we, you know, it was a necessity that we switched to working virtually overnight, and obviously we used the MS Teams platform to do this. However, we still needed one officer to visit the office at least once a week to check for postal applications, because it's although we'd switched virtually, people could still technically by law make those postal applications. So we still needed to go in and check that. As I said, I mean, we were in a good position, I think, pre-COVID anyway. The vast majority of our applications were available online, excuse me, before the pandemic. But, you know, as I said, I mean, there's still some applications, for example, personal licenses, which do require passport photos to be submitted, and therefore there's just no way that they can be online. So in terms of licensing subcommittees, we did initially adjourn all licensing subcommittees on the advice of the leader. In fact, and then we moved after a couple of months. I think the first committee was actually a planning committee, and I think we were then the second committee as a licensing subcommittee to move online virtually. And I think we found, unless anyone says otherwise, but I think we found this to be a great success. It means that that the subcommittees can be recorded, which is really good to have that record of committees. So that really helps if we're producing decision letters, whereas previously an officers had to make notes of that hearing and then we've had to go back. We can actually see exactly who said what, you know, exactly what was said. And it also means that residents can attend committees from the comfort of their homes, and likewise officers don't have to rack up later, you know, obviously they still have to record their hours, but it doesn't mean that they're travelling home later in the evening. As I said, all the residents are travelling into the town hall for a later committee. So we are looking, and we have discussed this with the chair, of maybe keeping this as a default option in future, unless members this evening have any objections. But I mean, I think the only reason that we might look to have a physical meeting in future is if we do have, it is a really large scale meeting, and possibly if there are accessibility issues that residents have raised. But yeah, I'm not sure what your views are on virtual licensing committees, and whether you'd like to keep this as a default option in future.
Are there any comments, suggestions from colleagues?
No,
yeah. I'm looking at, oh yes, I can see colleagues have got their hands raised. Councillor Layton and then Councillor Siddiq, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I mean, I think the remote meetings have certainly been working really, really well, both in other committees and for licensing as well, I'm sure. It's my understanding that it's kind of not really up to us, that it depends on government regulations, but I might be completely wrong. That was my understanding, that it's not necessarily up to us, but it may be at the level of subcommittees that we're able to have more freedom to determine how meetings take place, and it's only with certain types of meetings that were kind of held to government level regulations. But I was just going to say that was my understanding, but I'm sure where it is possible that they'd definitely be welcomed both by, you know, residents, applicants, councillors and officers as well.
No, that's a fair point. Actually, I should have said that. Actually, I think there was a pause initially because there was some question over the legality of having virtual online meetings, and then it was established that you could do that. And then I think from there, it just, you know, almost went from strength to strength, because everybody said, well, actually, this works for the majority of people. So, but yeah, and I mean, as I said, unless there's any other reasons that maybe we haven't fully understood, I think it's something that we continue with now that we think it's certainly a legal option anyway.
I think it's my understanding. Sorry, Adithir. I think it was my understanding that the regulations that allowed us to do things online were temporary. But Adithir, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so the regulations are temporary regulations, and at the moment there are discussions going on between local government representatives and other public sector organisations in terms of trying to encourage the government to amend the legislation to enable virtual meetings to continue. The difficult situation that we might have is that if the legislation isn't amended, then potentially we could find ourselves in June/July with government guidance reminding us all to socially distance, etc., but there being no ability to have virtual meetings. So it has been something that's been taken forward by the Local Government Association, and there is some legal action that's been commenced to try and get a declaration from the court. So we should find out within the next few weeks or so what the position is.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Ms. Silva.
Thanks, Alistair.
Councillor Layton, do you have a follow-up question to that?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Siddiqui?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good point from the Rachel. Yeah, if the legislation amended or changed or updated, yes, in my personal view, is a good idea. It's very helpful, like all other organizations, government organizations are moving to the CVP hearings or hybrid hearings, virtually. It will be very helpful for practically in future if we can continue or we can amend. I think this is the all coming up, all in other governmental organizations which they are doing. Practically, they are changing the legislation or amendments or asking for the permission if it's possible. In my personal view, it will be very helpful.
Thank you for your feedback, Councillor Siddiqui. I understand, Councillor Ahern, you had your hand raised previously.
I did, and then took it down, I think, because it was covered. I was going to raise the point. We're bound by government legislation. Though personally, I'll be glad when we can meet face to face again, because that will mean this blasted pandemic is over. And no matter how good these virtual meetings in, you can't beat the personal touch as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ahern. I think I agree with you. And my concern, we've heard how many people in our community are digitally excluded. And I think there are many digital barriers that could really hinder the whole accessibility element to it. So I would be concerned if we are not reaching out or allowing for people that want to reach out to licensing, for example, if you've got a representation to do so, if it was all done digitally. So exploring options around that and also removing those barriers or making reasonable adjustments or accommodating to the needs of constituents that may have accessibility requests, I think it's important, but I suppose we'll have to see, seek further clarification once the LGA gives further information about it.
Mm. Definitely, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, councillors. Thanks, Alistair. And I think also, I mean, just to make the point as well, I think recently we had a hearing where somebody actually phoned in to the MS Teams meeting as well. So there is that accessibility is sort of factored in with MS Teams that I thought I didn't realise was actually there. So, you know, people can just actually make a phone call to join the meeting as well, which obviously really helps. So just in terms of just moving on to the new procedures point. So yeah, new procedures and processes were created during the COVID pandemic. They were adapted. So just an example is this. I mean, this includes the process for signing licenses, which is now fully online, which includes an electronic signature that's dropped in by mainly Lisa or sometimes me when signing licenses. So all these things that sort of seem straightforward, we managed to sort of change to a digital solution almost overnight. So and just in terms of our enforcement, this did continue throughout the pandemic, and we will go into more detail of that shortly as well. But during the lockdowns, it was mainly drive-by inspections, and in many respects, I suppose that our enforcement became less complex during these lockdowns, as it was essentially a case of driving by somewhere, and if the lights were on, because there was very little that a hospitality venue could do, you sort of wondered, well, what is actually going on there? But obviously this became more complex and time consuming as we moved out of, so from March, then we moved into the summer, and we had the sort of the reopening in July, and we moved into a tiered system. This became a lot more labour intensive for officers, where they were having to go into premises, they were having to offer guidance and advice on the tiered system, they were having to look at COVID risk assessments, and whereby you could drive around of an evening and just see if places were open or not, and then have a further look. You were actually having to spend sometimes half an hour or an hour in a premises giving advice on a risk assessment. So obviously that that changed things dramatically. So thank you. I think that's everything from me on that particular slide. Thank you.
So yeah, so the impact which COVID had on the licensing service in relation to the finance management and the application. So to date in this financial year, we've had a decrease of 44% of applications. So only 873 to date. The main
I'm
reason.
sorry, Lisa, I'm going to have to interrupt, and as the nature of the meeting is quite interactive, I can see that Councillor Ahern has got his hand raised. Just wondering whether it's in relation to
the on the part of the report on page 33 that says all the problems people experience with the partial lifting of the lockdown to allow off sales, and all the problems you had with large numbers of people congregating, no social distancing. What lessons have been learned from there? And what I'm particularly concerned of, because you read a lot of things in the paper now with people working in supermarkets and on public transport being attacked when they're pointing out to people that they must wear masks or social distance. I mean, what backup have we got for our staff to make sure they don't get themselves into dangerous situations?
What I mean, I don't know, Lisa, I'm happy to cover that one, but I mean, it's I suppose in terms of masks, I mean that is something that the police would enforce. So that's something that's down to that. I mean, I know our commercial services team also give advice on masks, etc. But whenever we go into a licensed premises, I mean, we'll always carry out a proactive risk assessment, and we'll decide whether it's safe to go into that premises. But I know you also mentioned about off sales as well, and I know we were allowing. We were initially, and I think I'm going to cover it in another slide shortly, but we did initially offer a minor variation for people who wanted to add off sales where they've already got on sales, and then the government changed the primary legislation to allow that, and where you had on sales you could automatically have them anyway, so we stopped doing that. But I think the whole off sales issue is something that obviously we became quite aware of, and where initially we were trying to help businesses, suddenly we realized as the weather changed and the summer came around that things were changing quite dramatically, and actually I suppose inadvertently we created a situation and lots of people were gathering in green spaces, etc. So I think really what's happened during the pandemic is that things have just changed really, really quickly, and we've had to react very quickly to that. But as you said, I mean, officer safety is always our number one priority, and we'll always look into that and make sure that people carry out that risk assessment before they go in anywhere. So yeah, I hope that helps. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Lisa, would you like to carry on, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, the significant decrease is due to TENS. So you can see that the previous year we had 822 TENS. So far today, only 230. Obviously, TENS are normally used when people want to have events, outside events, or hospitality events. So that's been a significant decrease. Unfortunately for us, TENS are not time consuming and they're not a large income generator. So it hasn't actually saved a tremendous amount of officer time, because the majority of TENS we receive anyway are submitted online and completely integrated with our database. But that is the reason for the big drop. And obviously there has been a slowdown of some other applications as well. However, surprisingly, our licensed premises have increased. So we now have 947 premises in the borough. This covers all our licensed premises. So that has actually increased through this last year. Income. So yes, we have been hit quite hard. Approximately between £8,000 and £9,000 a month in income we are losing as a service, and this is due to our application fees. So that is currently ongoing. Obviously, some months, depending where we are within the pandemic and different tiers or lockdowns, has an impact on the applications we receive. However, we are looking at proactively, and we always are looking at other ways that we can generate income. So we're currently working on a project at the moment where we would like to be able to provide training to licensed businesses or personnel within the hospitality section or within licensed premises, offering a range of specialist courses. It's very much in its infancy, but we are looking at that, and we believe over time that could be actually quite a significant income stream for the team. So that's one area. As we touched on previously, we're looking at revising our pre-application advice service when we've come through the worst, hopefully come through the worst of COVID. And we have had a small amount of income from fixed penalty notices, which have been issued by the team for non-COVID compliance. Our current debt from non-payment of annual fees is 23,000, just in excess of 23,000. I must say, I think this is actually, it obviously is still a lot of money, but this is quite exceptional given the current pandemic. We're not far off where we were the previous year. I think the reason for this is we have been working with our licensed premises. We are liaising with them, we're calling them, and we are arranging payment plans.
Sorry, Lisa, we've got some kind of echo. I don't know if other colleagues can please mute themselves. I would be appreciated. I think it would make things better. Thank you.
So yes, so we have been working with our licensed businesses. We've been offering them payment plans. We've been putting their fees on hold. We've been really flexible in relation to our annual fees. We currently have 31 premises which are suspended. We have ceased suspending licenses. We kind of felt, businesses are having a really tough time at the moment, and sending them a suspension notice when they're being forced to close probably isn't very sympathetic. So we're not issuing any more suspension notices. Instead, we're kind of giving a friendly call to the license holders and seeing if there's anything we can do to help. And then our expenditure has increased over the last year as well, and this is due to COVID enforcement. We have, I'd like to say, I hope that we've been leading the way for licensing with our COVID-19 enforcement, and this has increased our staffing costs and also increased our legal costs, which is associated with any enforcement action we take. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you. So I think in terms of our help for business, I think it's fair to say that we were very conscious from the outset that the pandemic would have a huge impact on licensed premises. And for this reason, we did start to offer our free pre-application advice for business. I know we've mentioned this slightly earlier on. And we found this helped, especially where operators were trying to adapt their business to meet the ever-changing legislation. So, for example, initially where they didn't have the off sales and they wanted to add that, or they maybe wanted slightly later hours because they were just operating in the day. So we were happy to offer that advice to businesses in those circumstances. We've also been heavily involved in the outside space project, so the Our Space and Your Space campaign, and this allowed businesses to use the pavement area directly outside their venues to trade. I would say that the highways team are now managing this process themselves, but we are a consultee on this when they apply to use their outside area. So we can object, for example, where a pavement usage would interfere with the conditions of a license that says, for example, you can't use the outside area after a certain time or something else similar to that. So as Lisa sort of briefly mentioned as well, we still maintain a very flexible approach where it comes to annual fees. And we are allowing the late payment of some annual fees if businesses request this. And we do think that this flexible approach has probably gone some way, as Lisa mentioned earlier, to actually increase the number of licensed premises in the borough. So we definitely think that that's helped. So in terms of other help, I mean, early in the pandemic, we did take legal advice, and I know I've sort of mentioned this earlier on about the minor variation thing to add off sales where a business already has on sales. So this was to help pubs and restaurants who are unable to trade at all. So we took this advice, and then, as I said, shortly afterwards, the government then sort of jumped on that and they changed the primary legislation for that. And then we reached the summer, and it sort of did spiral a bit. And then we've since stopped offering that service, because obviously then we had people in green spaces, consuming off sales and creating antisocial behaviour, which is not something that we could have foreseen earlier on. So we did change our approach to that. And then in terms of enforcement, we have taken a pragmatic approach to enforcement, and this has been based on a letter to all licensing authorities from Kit Morthouse. And it basically said that we should be giving flexibility not to enforce certain conditions. So, for example, where a premises has a condition that says that after 9 p.m. in the evening, they shall have 3 door supervisors. And then if they're just selling takeaway food, technically by the letter of the law, they have to have those door supervisors standing there. So obviously we've changed that, and we are taking that pragmatic approach. But having said that, we obviously have to be very careful about about the approach that we're taking, and where there's any breaches that do concern COVID-19, we do take robust enforcement action, which is something that Christine is going to outline in the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So with respect to enforcement, where businesses fail to comply with COVID restrictions, local authorities have the powers to enforce. The enforcement tools are there to support officers' existing approach to enforcement where legal requirements are not being met. With respect to the licence review for COVID offences, prior to the application being submitted, there were a number of attempts to advise the licence holder on how he could operate his business under the regulations, including issuing a prohibition notice. However, the licensee was found to continuously breach the lockdown regulations at the time. We did liaise with police with respect to the possibility of them submitting a summary review. Evidently, we decided to take immediate action and submitted a review application, recommended the licence was revoked, making us one of the first local authorities to do so in response to COVID offences. In July, the committee considered all the evidence before them at a virtual hearing. The licence was revoked and subsequently appealed. Although the licence holder's barrister suggested that the licensing service should not have used the Licensing Act to take action against the premises, we have now appointed a barrister experienced in COVID legislation who has confirmed that we have a strong case and that we acted legally in response to the coronavirus breaches observed. Prohibition notices, we have served 4 prohibition notices, which formally notify the business owners in question of any COVID breaches observed and outline the steps that must be taken to bring them into compliance. There have been several legislative changes since the regulations first came into effect. In July, local authorities were authorised to issue fixed penalty notices for COVID non-compliance. Since these powers were introduced, we have issued 4. These include licensed premises served with 2 FPNs in response to multiple COVID breaches observed during officers' visits, one for £1,000 and another for £2,000. An FPN of £1,000 was also issued in response to a premises hosting a wedding reception of up to 100 guests. And lastly, an FPN of £1,000 was also issued to a licensed premises found to be trading after the 10 p.m. curfew. On this occasion, staff ignored police instruction to clear the premises and turned off their lights in an attempt to mislead the officers. If members require any information with respect to these cases, they are included in the exempt agenda item. Directions. The regulations also grant us powers to make directions which respond to serious threats or to public health, Local authorities can give directions to restrict or close individual premises, public outdoor spaces, and prohibit or restrict events. Any directions issued must be reviewed every 7 days to determine whether the conditions for making the direction continue to be met. Most recently, additional powers came into force enabling enforcement officers to issue improvement notices and restriction notices to premises that are not meeting COVID secure business requirements. The relevant review periods are set out in each of the notices. A review would occur at the end of each notice where officers will determine whether the recipient has complied with the notice. Operations, the licensing service has organised and led on several operation initiatives with other responsible authorities targeting specific areas in the borough for COVID-19 visits. On the 4th of July, approximately 60 licensed premises were visited over the course of the day. The reason for these visits was to check that the premises were COVID secure and advise operators where necessary. Following legislative changes introduced in September requiring premises to close at 10 p.m, further visits were undertaken specifically to high-profile and problem premises to observe whether the curfew was being adhered to. We also worked closely with the council's CCTV team, who were tasked to monitor the borough past 10 p.m, enabling us to respond to any intelligence received surrounding premises remaining open later into the evening. In December, London entered into Tier 2 and Tier 3 respectively. In response, we led on over 150 visits in total to licensed premises to check operators were adhering to those tier restrictions. The regulations affecting hospitality venues have changed several times since the legislation was first introduced last year, which has been very challenging. We are taking proportionate yet firm action where breaches of COVID-19 regulations are found. The licensed service has taken a key role in the enforcement of coronavirus legislation, enforcing COVID-19 non-compliance and offering assistance to operators during these unprecedented times. I don't know if you have anything else further to add to that, Adrian, if there's any questions.
No, I was just going to say, as you said, Christine, we've always taken, proportionate enforcement action. And I think, like you mentioned at the beginning, like in terms of I think we were the first authority, from what I can see as well, being part of the Institute of Licensing, to actually revoke a license by putting in the review as the licensing authority. And I know at the time there was some sort of dispute as to whether you could link coronavirus offences to the Licensing Act objectives. So yeah, so I think that was, because we did at that time, we were having discussions with the police and we were saying to them that this is crime and disorder potentially. Could you put in a summary review? And as I'm sure as many of you know, if the police put in a summary review, it can mean immediate closure of a licensed premises. And it can also mean that pending any appeal, the premises must remain closed. They didn't want to put in that review. So obviously we were left in a situation where we put in our review, and what that's now meant is that that's been appealed and the premises can remain open. So it's not, I think we took the right course of action, but then what we couldn't foresee is shortly after that, we had the powers to issue fixed penalty notices. And as soon as we've had those powers, we've used those powers and we've been issuing fixed penalty notices, and we've got compliance from premises quite quickly, because to be honest with you, the fines escalate dramatically, offence after offence. So it really sort of catches people's attention. So yeah, I think, as you know, and the government's been aware of that, and they've given local authorities powers, and where we've got those powers, we've taken advice and we've used them. So yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Overton. Councillor Layton, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't really have a question. I just, and I hate it when other members say that in other meetings. So sorry, it's not a question, but I really just wanted to say thank you to officers. His report is really, really detailed and really interesting. And essentially, I just wanted to say thank you for all your hard work over the past 12 months, because it's obvious from the report that kind of adapting to your new reality of working from home really hasn't been easy, and that there's kind of been many changes that you've had to get used to with regard to kind of remote working, but also enforcement. So yeah, I really just wanted to say thank you for being kind of so flexible and creative and adaptable, and supporting both businesses and residents during this time where things have been really uncertain and things have been changing really quickly, and there have been lots of unintended consequences. So yeah, it's obvious that the approach that you've taken has really paid off. So yeah, I just wanted to pass on my thanks, and please pass on my thanks to any officers from your teams who aren't present this evening as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Layton.
Hear to that. Hear.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I also wanted to say thank you so much. I mean, it's not only the officers, but the apprentices and volunteers that have joined the team recently. I mean, you're carrying out not only the service's key priorities, but at the same time, COVID-19 pandemic-related services. taking a key role in the enforcement of coronavirus legislation. So it's a challenging time. So thank you so much for all your hard work, your efficiency as well. And at the same time, trying to be flexible, supporting those small and other businesses in the borough that are struggling at the moment with the pandemic. So a big thank you to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I
Chair.
see
Thank you.
Councillor Kieran, you've got your hand raised, and then Councillor Brockleback-Fowler.
Many thanks, Chair. Thanks a lot to all the officers involved in the report and the amazing work they've done over the last year or so. As we had a number of these restrictions over the last year throughout the pandemic and lockdowns, so quite often a lot of businesses get confused with the restrictions and the changes that have taken place about 3 or 4 times. What sort of approach had we taken in terms of the businesses, those who weren't clear with the restrictions and also the new rules and all of that? So has the approach been very flexible, or the businesses, those who given the penalty notices, were the ones, those who were consistent businesses who have done the breaches in their licensing or the COVID breaches? So just wanted to clarify that.
So yeah, so on that point, I think we've issued fixed penalty notices only where there was a clear breach of the COVID regulations. So I mean, you're right in saying that there had been some, regulations, and there's, I don't know, almost sort of, well, difficult to maybe they haven't been as well publicized, so to speak. But where there's been a clear breach of the COVID regulations, and to anyone, it would be obvious that it's a clear breach of the COVID regulations, then we've issued the fixed penalty notice, and we've issued it sometimes without a warning previously. So I know on a couple of occasions we've just gone straight in there and issued it where there's been an obvious public health risk. So where you've got people indoors, large congregations of people, and it's, I mean, you only have to turn on the television or the radio to know that you can't do certain things. You don't have to be a license holder or a member of the licensing institute. It's not, you know that you can't do certain things. And in those circumstances where we've got, for example, body worn footage from the police, then we will issue a fixed penalty notice. On other occasions where offences have taken place, there was one particular occasion, I won't mention the name of the premises, but where it was an outside area and somebody was seen on CCTV sipping a drink, a pint, whilst they're queuing up within their licensed premises, within the beer garden area, whilst they're queuing up to get some food. We decided not to issue the fixed penalty notice because our view was that, the transmission of the virus was not an issue in those circumstances, and that was almost like a technical breach. So yes, we have found it's probably the most challenging time. Well, it is the most challenging time as a regulator, because you seem to be damned if you do and damned if you don't, because it's getting that balance right, because there's someone telling you, well, there's a pandemic on, and then there's someone also telling you, well, what about the businesses? They're going to suffer. And it's true to say that you issue one of these fines and it could end someone's livelihood. So we do understand that the responsibility that we've got, and we think about that very carefully when we serve any fixed penalty notices, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, can I just add on that? You're at the point you raised, Councillor, about advising businesses. So as the tiers changed, we did do several mail shots to all our licence holders, updating them of the changes in legislation, providing links to different government guidance, to advice of how they should be operating, asking them if they wanted to contact us for further information. So we regularly contacted all our licensed businesses throughout the last 9 months if there has been significant change, so they would have received that information. And we've also used, like the Hammersmith bids as well to get the message out there, to kind of assist as much as we possibly can.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to check whether we will go into an exempt part of the meeting to discuss a couple of the cases which I particularly want to comment on.
We will, and that's going to be on agenda item number 8 at the end of this initial part of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Overton, or Ms. White, or Ms. Perez, are you, have you got another slide for us? Excellent, thank you very much. So are we just moving then to agenda item number 5?
Yes, I believe
Yes.
so, Chair. So the pool of conditions. So
Thank you.
following feedback from members, we have recently revised our pool of conditions. We did this in consultation with the Fire Authority, Noise and Nuisance, Trading Standards, Health and Safety. We also, once we then had a draft of the amendments, we also then circulated that to all our LAG members, which is our licensing authority group meeting members. So that also includes further partners such as the Fire Authority and Child Protection. So we've now got the kind of final draft, if you like. It's been a really useful exercise for us to do this, to update the conditions and to have another look at them. There have been some minor changes and some significant changes, mainly following feedback from members. We've included a new section to cover remote sales of alcohol. We found that since March last year, that a number of applications have been going to the committee, have all been for remote sales of alcohol, where people have set up a business in their house or a warehouse and they want to sell alcohol online to be delivered. So due to the increase of these type of applications, we've included a section in there. So if I can just, I know that the conditions have been circulated. So if members have them to hand, I'd just like to highlight that area, which is, bear with me a second, it starts on page 7 of the conditions. And you can see from there that we've covered, you know, signs to be displayed on the website, what we should be asking, the operator should be asking for delivery drivers to carry out age verification checks. Following the issue we had with alcohol being consumed in outside spaces, we've created a condition which says delivery shall not be made to outdoor spaces, and that certain premises, you know, we may want to have closed to stop one of the licensing objectives being impacted. So we have a further condition provided at the end there about the alcohol for delivery only. And if I may, I would just like to take members to top of page 5 of the conditions. The very first condition on page 5 is a new condition which we have put in following the COVID pandemic. We didn't think it would be appropriate to mention COVID because we felt, you know, that these conditions are should cover kind of any pandemic. I hope obviously we don't have another one after this one, so we've kept it open. But basically the condition says that, you know, the operator should follow any guidance issued by us or the local authority if we believe the licensing objectives are going to be impacted. I think that's quite a powerful condition to include going forward. So they're just the kind of the main changes. There have, like I said, there have been certain other tweaks to the conditions, but they're the significant ones. I don't know if anyone has any questions on the pool of conditions at all.
Are there any questions? Yes, I can see, yes. Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler, your hand's raised.
Yes, thank you for that. I wonder, have any other authorities already proposed these new additions, or what kind of strength of legality do you think there is behind them?
So the conditions in relation to the remote sales of alcohol, they are very clear enforceable conditions. The condition which we've proposed about following guidance, it could be, we feel it is an enforceable condition. We wouldn't have put it on there, but we could, you know, it could be questioned whether it's proportionate. So we would have to make sure that if we were taking any enforcement action in relation to that condition, that, you know, it was reasonable, and proportionate, and in line with our enforcement policy. In relation to other authorities, funny you should say that. I actually went onto Westminster's site to see if they had updated, and their pool of conditions were removed when I looked, so I don't know if they're in the process of updating them. I've been onto another neighbouring borough website, and they've literally just copied our conditions, which I think is is a positive on us. So yeah, but I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any other authorities which have put in these new conditions. No.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments, questions from other colleagues? I'm looking at participants to see if I see any hand raised. Thank you very much, Lisa. Personally welcome the addition to the license pool of licensing conditions, as it's also, it reflects as well the nature of the current situation, and we're responding as well to what we've seen in terms of applications coming to licensing committee as well. So thank you very much. Okay, so I believe we're now moving on to agenda item number 6, licensing policies and cumulative impact policies.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So, as many of you may know, the evidence for both our Fulham and Shepherd's Bush cumulative impact policies is actually due to expire on the 6th of April 2021. The reason it expires then is because the Police and Crime Act 2018 actually said put cumulative impact policies on a statutory footing, and actually said that if you've got one, you need, from the date the legislation came into effect, which was the 6th of April 2018, that you had to that the evidence would expire, and that you had to, before that 3-year period, you had to renew your evidence. So we've COVID has created a bit of a situation for us, because we were due last year to carry out a review and some evidence gathering of both of our policies, to assess if there was evidence there. Obviously we couldn't do this, and you know, if we had have done this, or if we tried to squeeze in some evidence gathering early this year, it just wouldn't have been indicative of how the businesses were operating. So what we decided to do, and to be honest, your hand was forced somewhat, because you know, because of the pandemic, is to wait until the summer this year, when we can gather evidence and we can see what the nighttime economies look like, you know, post COVID. So yeah, so as I said that on the slides rather, the current proposal is therefore to let the evidence for both CIPs expire and carry out a consultation on this proposal. So we have sought legal's advice in the last couple of weeks about this, and they have said that although the evidence is expiring, we should still consult on that. So even though there's not really options, we should still go out to a consultation and say, well, you know, this is happening, just to let people know that that's the case. Now it's impractical to think that before the 6th of April that we're going to be able to make a decision on that consultation. So Adisu, and I don't know, she may mention you know, another point on this, but has said that she is happy that in the interim period before the consultation is determined, that we can put on decision letters, and this is only where we're deciding on policies that actually fall within the cumulative impact areas, that there's almost a disclaimer to say that the evidence, you know, from either of these geographical policies has not been taken into account, and where we have spoken about cumulative impact in the decisions, it's the general cumulative impact. It's not the evidence from the policies. And then, you know, whenever it is in May, June, or later in the summer, we can then have this consultation that says, okay, these policies are removed. But I suppose and yeah, I mean, don't panic, I suppose is the key thing there. And I don't mean to be silly when I say that, but I mean, it's cumulative impact is mentioned in section 182 of the guidance, so it can be taken into account outside of having a specific policy in place. And you know, as said, I mean, this approach of allowing the evidence to expire, and then, you know, actually seeing what evidence there is in the summer when businesses reopen, because they're obviously going to start, you know, operating in a different way, will allow us to see how the nighttime economies and the daytime economies have responded to COVID-19 and work out what the new normal is. Yes, so I think that helps. I don't know if the members have got any opinions on that, or would like to ask any questions in relation to our approach to that.
Do I see any hands raised? I'm just having a look. If you bear with me, please. No hands raised.
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
I obviously have supported the CIP policies for a very, very long time. And I think they've made a huge difference to the borough where they've existed. I noted the don't panic bit, but nevertheless, as I remember when I was chairing licensing, it was very, very important that we had this as a strong indicator as to what could happen. And I would say it actually saved our town centres from the most dreadful effects of the Licensing Act in 2003. So I am absolutely adamant that as soon as it is possible, that a consultation is done which would renew, basically, or possibly expand. I leave that to your judgment. You know, but we need in central London to have this kind of policy in place.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Go on.
I would just say, yeah, just in response to that, and that's definitely what we plan to do. We do plan to undertake that consultation, and we do plan to undertake that evidence gathering. But you know, obviously these things are led by the evidence, and are sort of almost anecdotal evidence. Tells us at the moment that really, you know, our town centres have changed quite dramatically from what they were, you know, 10 years ago, and where you used to have, you know, a bar next to another bar, and people used to go from one bar to another and drinking and whatever, and you know, and the Fulham and maybe Shepherd's Bush was a destination premises. It has changed quite dramatically from that, and I know I did send around that video. I don't know if anybody had a chance to have a look at that, from Philip Colvin, but he actually sort of speaks about that, and he speaks about cumulative impact policies being you know, almost something of the past, so to speak, and that there are better ways to regulate and to control the nighttime economy than using cumulative impact policies that seem to be sort of an approach to say, well, everything in this area, but you know, there shouldn't be no more applications in this area. But it may be that the evidence shows that actually there's clusters, because we have found that as well. So rather than have, you know, one particular town or two particular town centres, we found issues in smaller areas around. So it might be that actually, okay, we don't have the evidence for these two cumulative impact policies, but we actually have 3 or 4 other smaller ones. So who knows, but it will definitely be evidence led, and we'll do that as soon as we can see that there's some sort of normality around the economy, definitely.
Mr. Overton, and what's the evidence indicating? Could there potentially be another area within the borough based on that evidence, or are we only coming to a conclusion once we've done the consultation?
It would, yeah, it would. I think I don't want to speak out of turn, but I mean, we do have some smaller clusters, much smaller than say Fulham or Shepherd's Bush. But if we think about problem premises and complaints and whatever, we can see links to maybe, I don't know, a cluster of premises on Wandsworth Bridge Road or a cluster of premises on New Kings Road. And but then you do think, well, is that enough for a policy itself, or is that actually just better enforcement? Is that just, you know, talking to the license holders, better communication? You know, I don't know. Are you using the right tool to sort of gain compliance? You know, I suppose it's what you want to achieve. So, but I think that will all come out with the evidence gathering, and we'll obviously gather the data from the police and ambulance data and that type of thing to try and work out where we're going to need to gather that evidence before we move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Overton. Councillor Blocken-Fowler, your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to come back to this. In a sense, how you've explained that it's not as necessary now is because it has worked. It's cured what was the most difficult situation in both Shepherd's Bush and Fulham. and with a lot of violent crime and so on and so forth. Now, my argument would be kind of the opposite to yours, in that it is still necessary because things can revert, and things have only changed because of it. So that's why I would argue that I think it's very important that within our town centres we have this to try and keep, the relatively stable status quo.
Thank you for your feedback, and it is noted. Mr. Overton, you mentioned working with the police. A question, please, on how do you work with the police at the moment in terms of that evidence gathering? And I also note from the report reference to the licensing action groups. If you could please tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you.
So at the moment, it's during COVID, we're actually having meetings twice a week with the police, and we're talking about COVID issues, obviously, and they're advising us. They're saying, well, for example, the police went to X, premises over the weekend. We've got some body-worn footage, and they'll send it to us, and we'll discuss that at a meeting. So we'll decide whether to issue, for example, FPNs as part of a multi-agency approach. So when because obviously we've got certain powers and the police have got other powers, and we've got the powers to issue FPN, so we'll work closely with them. And should have probably said that earlier on, whenever we issue these FPNs, it's always when we've discussed this with the police as well. But in terms of the data, etc., for cumulative impact policies, that's something that they would that is sort of collected more centrally, if you like, and they would send that to us. And if we ask for it over a period of time, they would say, well, we've had X number of call outs to this area in this time, and then we could use that as evidence. And yeah, so in answer to Councillor Brocklebank Fowler's response as well, there's no doubt this is not going to be like a unilateral decision that we're going to not introduce cumulative impact policies. We would it's always evidence based, so we would definitely carry out those studies, and then we would see where the evidence led us. But it's just from our point of view, it just seems that it's going that way. But we'll obviously follow the evidence and put in place whatever measures are necessary.
Thank you very much for highlighting the fact that it's evidence-based and that there are going to be studies and consultations involved. I also think it's important to remind us all of your bullet point 5 on the slide that we've got in front of us. The don't panic. Cumulative impact is mentioned in the section 182 guidance and can be taken into account without a specific area policy in place, which I think is quite relevant.
I think that's the key point. Yeah, it's the sort of take-home message, I suppose, from the slide, really. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Overton. Are there any further questions or comments? Okay.
So I suppose this sort of slide, I've mentioned a lot of the things about it or the ideas behind it anyway, but the general our main licensing policy is due to expire in July 2022 next year. So we have been looking into certain things that we may implement into this policy. And again, this is something that has been delayed by COVID, because this is something we were looking into in sort of 2019, ready to sort of gather evidence for the policy and ready to be renewed in 2022. But we have looked into certain ideas, and again, these are just ideas at the moment, but possibly replicating the planning regeneration areas, so that you could say that there's special policy areas for different types of businesses, because I think it's probably true to say that our policy is guilty at the moment of possibly being a list of things that you shouldn't do, rather than being almost like an aspirational document that says, well, hang on, if you do want to do X, Y, and Z, why don't you do it in these areas? Why, if you want to have a late night venue, why don't you do it where there's not many residents around, or that type of thing? So I think that we want to sort of go along those lines, because what we were conscious of happening is that planning have got one policy and we've got another policy, and they might be saying contradictory things. So we want to sort of link those two things up. But again, that's just an idea at the moment, and there'll be a full consultation on that. And likewise with the free pre-application advice, we're really conscious about the nighttime economy, especially the entertainment sector as well, is really suffering as well, live music, that type of thing. So we were thinking of making it a permanent thing where if anybody wanted to provide live music at a venue, that we would give them free pre-application advice about that, about how to do that, to try and encourage that, because there's certainly certain types of businesses that we want to encourage back to the borough. And then just more generally working with the London Night Czar, which we've been to several meetings, and the head of the Nighttime Commission about opportunities to support a 24-hour borough in London, which is, I would say, is a caveat to that, which is sensitive to residents and that, you know, is not going to cause disturbances, crime and disorder, or nuisance really. So yeah, I'll pass over to Lisa in terms of the gambling section. I think she's got an update on that.
Yes, so our statement of gambling principles is due to expire in January 2022. So we will be looking at our principles this year, and we will be going out to consultation if there's going to be any amendments, probably late summer, I would imagine. But on that note, in relation to gambling, the Gambling Commission have just launched a consultation seeking views on both online gambling, land-based gambling, advertising, the Gambling Commission powers, and also age verification limits. We've looked at the consultation and the evidence which has been provided today, and we will be responding to that via the Institute of Licensing. Just having looked at the evidence so far, we will be fully supporting tougher restrictions in all areas, but we will be obviously looking at that in more detail. In addition, which is something which I think is a real positive for Hammersmith and Fulham, that we have recently, I've been involved in a local, in a pan-London group, which has been set up. It's very much in its infant stages to address problem gambling and to try and protect those most vulnerable from gambling, either online or land-based. And it's to have a look at, as a city, how we can assist and what measures we can put in place. So I think that's really exciting for Hammersmith and Fulham. We'll be working with public health colleagues across the city, and we can keep you updated on how that goes. I should have also said, actually, apologies, that just jumping back one, apologies, that in relation to the consultation, we're not sure if any changes to the Act will be in place by the time we go out to consult on our policy. So that's something we would just have to look at. Obviously, we have to renew our policy, but I kind of hope that any changes to the Act will be in place by then, so we can obviously amend our policy if we see fit as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm seeing the slide in front of me. Are we then moving on to agenda item number 7, enforcement history in subcommittee reports?
Yes, I think that's right, Chair. I think this is item 7. Yeah. So this, I don't know. This, I think this might be quite a brief item, but it was just, I know it was raised with us about enforcement history and subcommittee reports and what benefit that had, and I know that historically this information has been included in reports, and it has actually outlined quite detailed information on breaches, warning letters issued, prosecutions, and sometimes an update on ongoing investigations. And concerns were raised with us about the availability of this information in the public domain, especially where it's concerning the ongoing investigation. So to try and sort of head this off, our proposal was to try and include enforcement history in future as an exempt item only, which would only then be sent to the members and to the applicant. So following on from that, the questions are, do members first of all find the enforcement history helpful, which I don't know, I assume the answer is yes, because obviously you need to form a judgment on a particular premises and the way it operates. But then would there be an objection to the exempt agenda suggestion? So I suppose there's 2 questions there really for members to see what they think.
Okay. Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to say the putting it in the exempt agenda sounds like a sensible compromise, and I think yes, that history would be helpful. I suppose the only question I have is there any kind of are members allowed to use that information to form a judgment in terms of, you know, historical breaches? I'm just thinking, in a legal sense, are we allowed to use that information to form a judgment?
Can we have some guidance maybe from legal as well to that question, or maybe Mr. Overton or Dwight?
Thank you, Councillor Layton. I think the information that is going to be provided in the exempt report will relate to actions which are, I guess, either completed or are ongoing. So at a point where a decision has been made to proceed with those actions. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, I don't believe there are items covered where there is a pending decision as to whether or not to take any action. I think these are matters where the decision has already been made.
I think sometimes, I may be mistaken, but I think sometimes in some reports we might have said, you know, we are thinking of issuing a warning letter for this, or we went by this premises and we saw that they're open at this time and we're liaising with the license holder about these issues. So I think possibly we've strayed into those areas in the past. So yeah, I think it's really good to have this conversation to decide, well, actually you can only mention it where you've issued a warning letter or you've made some, you know, you've sort of drawn a line in the sand, so to speak. But yeah.
Could I also just add, sorry, that I guess in terms of the enforcement history, it very much depends on the type of application that you're dealing with. I think if you're dealing with, not to generalise, but if you were dealing with a review application where the proposal was to, the recommendation, I don't know, by the police was to revoke, then it would be of relevance to you to know that actually this is a premises that over the years X, Y, and Z has happened and it hasn't been complied with, to therefore understand why you've got to the point of being asked to revoke the licence. That would be a slightly different scenario to one where something may have been observed, nothing has actually happened, there's no breach of any of the licensing conditions. I think it's probably on a case-by-case basis, and it's always open to members if there is an interest in wanting to understand if there is enforcement history, if it's not documented in the report, to ask that question. Is there any history necessarily attached to it? But I think it's reviews come to mind, because then particularly that's the most draconian action is proposed in reviews, and then you'd want to have, I guess, as much information as possible before deciding whether you want to take that action or not.
I suppose the only thing I would add to that is I know we have had some occasions in the past where we've issued warnings to premises for unlicensed activities, and then we've said to them, you know, if you want a license, this is how you go about it. And we've issued a number of warning letters for this unlicensed activity, and then they've applied for the license and it's come before the members. So I suppose it's a case of do we then include those warnings to give members a flavour of the fact that really this premises is only applying for a license because we've told them that is, you know, what they need to do, sort of thing. I don't know whether that's something to be considered as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Overton. Do you have a follow-up question to that, Councillor Layton?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. I note so that Councillor Victoria Fowler, you had your hand up a while ago. Are you still wanting to ask?
No, it's fine.
It's fine, okay. Thank you very much. And I also see the hand up from Councillor Keum.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the enforcement history is quite helpful. The objection to the exempt agenda suggestion, I mean, as explained earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard it correctly, was it the suggestion is that all the actions taken are being put in there, or the ones which still are ongoing for the exempt agenda?
I think the proposal was to put everything in an exempt agenda because we were then reassured that it was exempt and it wasn't open to the wider public, so to speak. So we would put on about ongoing, but then I'd take on Adesula's point as well. Maybe it should just be, you know, we'd be happy just to put on prosecutions, warning letters, and not things that weren't that hadn't, you know, there wasn't a result to that, if you see what I mean.
I would agree to that. I wouldn't have any objection to that.
Thank you.
Are there any comments or feedback? Okay, then shall we move to agenda item number 8, which is
Can I just, before we go off line, Chair, if I may,
Yes, of
apologies
course.
for interrupting you, but Adrian and I just wanted to publicly thank the licensing team. You can see all our officers here. Unfortunately, we don't have a picture of our volunteer Inez, but she's very much of our team, part of our team. And, you know, everything we've given you information on tonight and details on, it's everyone's work. It's not just Adrian and I. So we want to publicly thank them for their hard work, for their dedication, and you know, they have assisted us and businesses hugely throughout the last year or so. So a big thank you to everyone.
I would just add to that. So a lot of officers have worked out of hours, you know, without being asked. They've been out, you know, at the weekend and you know, later on in the evening, and have really sort of gone above and beyond. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but they really have, and I think it's meant that we can keep the service going during the pandemic. Really, it's been a massive help.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I think yes, I think it's important as well to record it. I know this meeting is being recorded on our YouTube channel, and it's great that it's recorded. Just to, I'm sure other members of the committee will join me in thanking your hard work, your effort, and how much you've done in the last year as well with the COVID-19. It's much appreciated, and the reports and the activities are very thorough. So thank you so much for what you're doing for Hammersmith and Fulham. Councillor Sadiq, your hand is raised.
Chair.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. I want to just make a comment rather than a question. I want to say a special thank you to the whole team doing the amazing work and amazing report with the limited resources, and especially they reduced their debts 18% in this year until the March 2020. So there's amazing work with the limited resources and niche team. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sadiq. Councillor Ahern?
I just said I agree with you 100%.
Oh, fantastic, great. Thank you very much. So I want to just formally move to agenda item number 8. Which is asking for the members of the committee to see if they agree to the proposed resolution. If I can draw your attention to page 3 of your agenda packs, I'm going to read out the proposed resolution. Under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following items of business on the grounds that they contain the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the said Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption currently outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is there consensus with everyone?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
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 Perfect, great, thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone watching the Council's YouTube channel for watching our annual licensing meeting. The live stream will be turned off shortly, as the next item is a private meeting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Chair, bear with me. I'm just turning the live stream off and I'll tell you when it's off.